Good evening again. I think we can begin while friends make themselves comfortable. Thank you so much for being here this evening for the Ravi Sondhi Spirit of Bangalore lecture. I'm tempted to say lecture series, but I have my fingers crossed. This lecture really tries to celebrate the life of my late father, whom we lost to COVID last year. He was a true blue Bangalorean, and we thought that we would try and find topics and speakers who can recreate the Bangalore of old that we all dearly love. And I know Dad would have been thrilled to see this wonderful cross-section of Bangalore in attendance today. So thank you once again for being with us. For those of you who didn't know my father, he was a partition migrant. He was born in Quetta in 1939. He moved to Shimla at Partition, then moved to Bangalore with his entrepreneurial spirit and set up what many of you may have known in the 60s as Three Aces, which actually earned itself a sketch by Paul Fernandez. He then moved into the sports business, set up a Bangalore institution, Hat-Trick Sports, which many of you would be familiar with. It was in service from 1977 to 2021, having necessitated us to close it down upon his passing. We have prints of Hat-Trick Sports for all of you on your way out, so please do collect them. It's a nice black and white photograph just a couple of days before we locked up, taken by my friend Lokesh, who's our designated photographer today. Dad was also a keen cricketer. He was one of the movers of the Friends Union Cricket Club, and I'm really delighted to see friends from FUCC here. He had Ravina for a daughter who's a veritable Bangalore institution in her own right. Dad, even though I say it myself, I think embodied a certain civility and goodness, which I think is valuable in the times that we live in today. And therefore, it's a privilege to be able to celebrate and share his life with each of you this evening at this wonderful heritage Kothari Hall. I acknowledge the presence of Mr. Gopal Gandhi, Professor Ravi Varma Kumar, and many other esteemed friends from Bangalore. Our topic today is Bangalore and the Partition. I could scarcely think of anyone other than Mr. Chiranjiv Singh ji to address this topic. It's a topic that's been dear to our family. My mother's side too was from Lahore. We hardly ever got our folks to talk about partition, but the interesting thing was that they had stories to tell, and already in the course of the evening I've met friends who have their families from different parts of Pakistan, and I hope that the oral histories will be recorded because they're priceless and they're quickly vanishing. Mr. Gandhi will speak for about 40 minutes and we will have about 15 to 20 minutes for an interaction after. For those of you who may be interested, I've set up a small gallery of old Hat-Trick photographs at my office, so whenever you'd like to pop in and take a look, let me know. We're really pleased that we were able to support the Karnataka cricket team for the blind in my dad's memory, and I welcome friends from the Samarthanam Trust. Mr. Chiranjiv Singh ji really is too well known to all of Bangalore for an introduction, but for good order's sake, I have the pleasure of introducing him to you. Mr. Singh joined the IAS in 1969. He retired in 2005 as Development Commissioner of Karnataka and Additional Chief Secretary to the government. During his career, he held various positions in the central and state governments. He was also on the governing bodies of the Indian Institute of Science, the Institute of Social and Economic Change, ISEC, as a representative of the government of Karnataka. Mr. Singh was visiting fellow of the Queen Elizabeth House, Oxford University. He was ambassador of India, importantly, to UNESCO in Paris, and was the president of the Alliance Française from 2005 to 2017. Since his retirement, Mr. Singh has been associated with numerous NGOs working in the fields of rural development, environment, culture, and arts. For his services rendered to the state, he was awarded the Rajyotsava Award in 2005 by the government of Karnataka. He was also awarded the Chevalier de l'Ordre National de Marie, pardon my French, but in other words, the knighthood by the French government through the President of France in 2015 for his contribution to Indo-French culture. It gives me great pleasure to give you Mr. Chiranjiv Singh.
Friends, it's an honor to deliver the first Ravi Sondhi Spirit of Bangalore lecture. And I'm thankful to Dr. Aditya Sondhi for giving me this opportunity. The theme this year is Bangalore and the Partition. This is appropriate. When the country is celebrating the Amrit Mahotsava of Azadi, the Diamond Jubilee of our independence, it is time to look back and consider the toll which partition took on the people affected by it and the price which they paid. Ravi Sondhi ji was a child of partition. He was 8 years old when the partition took place and grew up as a refugee like lakhs of others, including me. That he located himself in Bangalore and contributed so much to its cultural life is a tale of grit, determination, and luck. He's one of those who made Bangalore, Bangalore. As a restaurateur, he opened restaurants, introduced espresso coffee, jukebox, cabaret, live band, and different types of cuisine to Bangalore. When he shifted to sports business, he became a mentor to many budding sports persons, especially cricketers. Rahul Dravid, Anil Kumble, Vishwanath, Syed Kirmani, and so many others were nurtured by Sondhi ji. He was a cricketer at heart and loved the game. When he opened Hat-Trick, the renowned sports goods store, it was both his vocation and avocation. His contribution to promotion of cricket and other sports would be remembered warmly when the history of contemporary culture of Bangalore is written. He was a warm-hearted and generous person. A measure of the man is that for 44 years that he ran Hat-Trick, no employee was ever sent off. Not only the welfare of employees, but even of their families was looked after. It was such qualities of heart which made him remain the president of the Sports Goods Dealers Association for 35 years. That's a remarkable achievement. Ravi Sondhi and Hat-Trick became an institution of Bangalore. When the greats of cricket came to Bangalore, a visit to this institution became a must. Such was the Punjabi charm of Ravi ji. He was a devoted family man. He had a sense of fulfillment in the upbringing of his children and took pride in their achievements. He was a true Punjabi with the joie de vivre of Punjabis. He was a lover of the Punjabi language, and it used to sadden him that the Punjabis outside Punjab were getting cut off from this great and beautiful language of saints, Sufis, and Gurus. About this language and this land, which Ravi ji loved, Maulvi Suleiman of Chakwal, now in West Punjab, a poet of early 19th century wrote, Peshawar thi Jamuna tain, Chamba thi ta dera, Samjan janan lok Punjabi, Sacha Sukhan e mera. From Peshawar to the Jamuna, and from Chamba, now in Himachal Pradesh, and from Chamba to Dera Ghazi Khan, Punjabi folk understand and value the truth of my verses. It was this Punjab which has been partitioned and repartitioned. In Punjab, they say that it was not partition of India, it was partition of Punjab and Bengal. They suffered and they paid the price. Sindh went to Pakistan as a whole. It was not partition. We who are victims and survivors of the partition have it in our bones, but for those of you who have no real idea of the havoc caused by the partition, here is a brief quote from Leonard Mosley's book, Last Days of the British Raj. He writes, India in 1947 was a bumper year for vultures. They had no need to look for rotting flesh, for it was all around them, animal and human. 600,000 dead, 14 million driven from their homes, 100,000 young girls kidnapped by both sides, forcibly converted or sold on the auction block. The celebrated Urdu writer Ismat Chughtai wrote, it wasn't only that the country was split into two. Bodies and souls were also divided. Moral beliefs were tossed aside, and humanity was in shreds. Sanjeev Jain and Alok Sareen, psychiatrists associated with NIMHANS here, have pointed out that displacement and uprooting can have lasting effects on our mental states. In his essay, The Death of an Empire, Ashish Nandi has written, the partition introduced into the South Asian public life a new actor, the refugee. He was the uprooted, partly deracinated, embittered victim who knew suffering and had seen the transience of social ties, betrayal of friends, and the worst of human depravity. The great Sufi saint of the 12th century, father of Punjabi poetry, Sheikh Farid, whose verses are included in Guru Granth Sahib, said, Bar paraye baisna, Sai mujhe na de. Lord, make me not take refuge at strangers' door. This was the fate that millions of refugees could not escape. Was partition inevitable? Was it Pandit Nehru's intransigence in not giving Jinnah the importance that he deserved as his senior that led to it? Was it Jinnah's unbending two-nation theory that led to partition? These questions would be debated and debated. The fact is that the partition happened, and many factors led to it. All the leaders of that time were guilty, some more, some less. But it should be noted that before Jinnah, V.D. Savarkar had propounded the two-nation theory, that Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations which cannot coexist. Savarkar is the ideological anchor of the political Hindutva which is now in the ascendant. Communalism is seldom one-sided. It feeds on the other, and the other is always there. As an aside, when the talks about partition were going on, the Dalit leader N. Rajabhar raised the demand for an Achutistan for Dalits. Biyalal, another Dalit leader, started an agitation for a separate Achutistan. Achut means untouchable. Pakistan was for Muslims, Hindustan for Hindus, so there should be Achutistan for Achuts. The term Dalit was not in vogue then. Biyalal started his agitation for Achutistan in November 1946. We are neither Hindus nor Muslims, he said, so we should have our own land. The demand for Achutistan was buried in the escalating Hindu-Muslim communal frenzy. According to one estimate, over 8,000 refugees came to Karnataka, of which some 6,500 were from Sindh. The remaining were from Punjab. Most of the refugees settled down in Bangalore, though there were those who settled down in places like Hubli, Belgaum, Mysore, Gulbarga also. These numbers are small, so the arrival of displaced persons did not cause any demographic upheaval, as it did in the north. Delhi, for example, became an overwhelmingly Punjabi city with the massive influx of refugees in a matter of weeks. It retained its predominant Punjabi character till the 70s of the last century, after which migration from Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and other Hindi-speaking states accelerated. But Punjabi culture still remains the dominant strand of the emerging Delhi culture. The refugees did not come to Bangalore as a sudden influx. They came over a period of time in smaller numbers. Most of them, after crossing over, had gone to refugee camps. Later, they moved to distant places like Bangalore. As I have mentioned, Sindh was not partitioned. The Hindus and Sikhs in Sindh did not leave en masse when Pakistan came into being. They started leaving when Muslims from UP, Hyderabad, and other states came to Karachi in large numbers and started communal riots to displace the Hindus in order to occupy their houses and businesses. The Sindhi migration was not as precipitate as the Punjabi migration. Bengali refugees did not come to Bangalore. The Bengalis started coming to Bangalore in the 70s for reasons not connected with partition. They have a good presence in Bangalore now. But Bengal's trauma was no less. As Shravani Biswas wrote, Bengal's partition is inseminated in the Bengali psyche through everyday negotiations with idioms, abuses, folk songs, novels, or stories, as well as the everyday struggle for existence. Determinism, which precludes free will, is ingrained in the partition, where the people had no choice. Those who wish to understand what displacement did to the psyche of the victims should see, I would suggest, Ritik Ghatak's Partition trilogy, Meghe Dhaka Tara, Komal Gandhar, and Shubarna Rekha. These films are available online now. You can search for them. I think it's worth seeing these films. Bangalore's experience of the partition was through Sindhi and Punjabi refugees. Some Muslims from Bangalore went to Pakistan hoping for better material prospects. They settled down mostly in Karachi and seem to have done well. They have founded a Bangalore town in Karachi. There is a Bangalore town in Karachi. No matter where the displaced are, the yearning for roots is always there. So the Bangalore town in Karachi. Some left Bangalore for Pakistan and some came to Bangalore from Pakistan. It all evens out. The Maharaja's government was sympathetic to the refugees' plight and generously gave them loans and land to build houses. A commissioner for rehabilitation was appointed by the Maharaja's government, and a monthly stipend of 500 rupees was also given to the families at that time. Most of them started life from scratch. Many of them, especially the Sikh migrants, had an earlier connection with Bangalore or had some relatives here. They were either defense suppliers or stores managers in defense establishments. The connection was important. They went into professions they were generally engaged in before the partition. Thus, Sindhis went into textile and other businesses, and Sikhs into transport-related and sports and spare parts business. A Sindhi silk factory owner started life in Bangalore as a pavement clothes seller. That today he is a factory owner is a tribute to his business acumen and the generous culture of the city. Is that open culture becoming closed now? We shall come to that question later. In the aftermath of the partition, the city was open-hearted to the migrants. It was also spared the communal rioting of the North Indian cities. The eminent Urdu poet and a native Bangalorean, Khalil Mamoon, attributes this to the goodwill earned by Sir Mirza Ismail as Diwan of Mysore. This may well be the case. Professor C.D. Narasimhaiah, a Padma Bhushan awardee, in his autobiography writes about his meeting Sir Mirza Ismail in the late 50s. It is an affectionate account, and Professor Narasimhaiah ends by saying, even a short meeting with a living legend, which Sir Mirza was, demonstrated that the legend had substantial basis. Sir Mirza Ismail had done a lot for the beautification of Bangalore. The Punjabis and Sindhis who had settled down in Bangalore before the partition generously helped the newcomers. At the initiative of General Malhotra, the Punjabi Sabha was formed in Bangalore in 1936. Members of the Punjabi Sabha would go to the railway station when the trains arrived. They would receive the refugees, take them to chowdhuries, give them stoves and some provisions and clothes. Later, the Mysore government started helping them. But the Sindhis and Punjabis soon started doing their business and stood on their feet. Remaining on dole was not their culture. Some who had brought a little gold with them sold it to finance their business or build houses. Interestingly, they had to go to Chennai to sell their gold, where Telugu jewelers bought it. There was no one in Bangalore buying their gold. This is a measure of how Bangalore has changed since then. The city was not so sprawling then, since many newcomers had some connection with the earlier settlers who generously had a defense connection. They settled in the cantonment area. Sikhs had constructed a Gurudwara in 1943. The newcomers settled within a convenient distance from the Gurudwara. The Sindhi refugees established the Sindhi colony in Coxtown of cantonment. The Sindhis also used to go to the Gurudwara. They had kirtan in their homes by turns in the morning, where both communities participated. The Gurudwara played an important role in the emotional well-being of the newcomers. As the city grew and people moved to new extensions, those close bonds also got loosened. Most of the refugees found the cantonment hospitable, but the Punjabi Hindus settled down in Malleshwaram. The reason was that some of the earlier Hindu Punjabi businessmen had settled in Malleshwaram. In general, the refugees felt at home in the culture of the cantonment. In a sense, the cantonment was a settlement of the outsiders. When the British set it up as their military station, they brought along with them people from Madras. The military station, which later developed into Bangalore cantonment, was ruled from Madras and was an enclave of the Madras presidency. It was not part of the Mysore state. The Pete, that is the city, was a part of the Mysore state. The two parts remained separate till 1949. The two cultures developed separately. One was the British colonial culture, the other was courtly Mysore culture. The refugees who settled down in the cantonment learned Tamil and not Kannada. Eastern parts of Bangalore were largely Telugu speaking, they still are. Kempegowda's mother tongue, incidentally, was Telugu. Notice that the main road of Koramangala in East Bangalore is named as Mahayogi Vemana Road. Vemana was the saint poet of the Andhras who occupies the same position in the Telugu-speaking states which Basavana occupies in Karnataka. But what should be remembered here is that neither Vemana nor Basavana had any place in the Anglo-Indian culture of the cantonment. Nevertheless, the cantonment culture was an amalgamation of different subcultures, which provided hospitable environment to the newcomers then and newcomers now. Paul Fernandez's colorful drawings are a delightful graphic record of a fast-changing cantonment culture. The arrival of refugees brought two more subcultures, Sindhi and Punjabi, to a city of subcultures. All big cities have subcultures, but the case of Bangalore is unique. The cantonment was not a part of Mysore state. The state emblem of Karnataka, Gandabhairunda, the mythical two-headed bird, is an apt metaphor for Bangalore. When S. Divakar, a Kannada writer, writes about Gandhi Bazaar in the city, he says that, I quote, "In and around Gandhi Bazaar lived so many personalities who have gone into the pages of history, like B.G.L. Swami, D.V.G., M.S. Puttana, A.R. Krishna Shastri, A.N. Subbarao, Anur Ramkrishna, L. Raja Rao, R.K. Surya Narayana, and Masti Venkatesh Iyengar. Would these names evoke any feelings in the sophisticated cantonment crowd? This is the schizophrenia of Bangalore. The partition refugees' numbers were small. They did not change Bangalore materially, but there was an indirect fallout of the partition that changed Bangalore profoundly and irrevocably. That was the location of large public sector undertakings, PSUs, in Bangalore. Partition changed the geographical boundaries of India. Before the partition, the geographical center of India was near Jhansi. After the partition, it is near Nagpur. Important PSUs and defense establishments had to be located away from the hostile borders. Bangalore proved to be an ideal location. Climate was not the only reason, because there were places like Dehradun and the entire sub-montane region which had pleasant climate, but they were close to the borders. So Bangalore it was. These large PSUs built their townships. Employees from all over came to them and made Bangalore their home. This was the major migration of outsiders to Bangalore, not the partition. And and the other major wave of outsiders in Bangalore was when it became the IT hub. This made Bangalore famous, and in America, Bangalore, the proper noun, became a verb for those who lost their jobs. They were Bangalored. The townships of PSUs, with their fine layouts, enriched the city socially and culturally. Their drama clubs, cultural associations, and Kannada Sanghas contributed to the cultural life of the city. The IT industry feeds on the city and has caused heartburn among the native Kannadigas who feel alienated in their own capital. This massive influx has reduced the Kannada-speaking population to a minority. This has given rise to outfits like the Kannada Rakshana Vedike, Kannada Sena, and others. It was a reaction which was bound to happen. Culture trumps economics. The change of name from anglicized Bangalore to native Bengaluru is an assertion of cultural identity. Saving Kannada, Kannada Rakshana, is not just a question of language, it's a question of cultural identity. Language is a channel of culture. So, what culture? The old Mysore culture with its overlay of courtly Brahmanical culture, or the culture of a unified Karnataka with its Lingayat-dominated culture. This is a fault line which has not been bridged. It was the fear of this alien North Karnataka cultural takeover which made old Mysore people oppose unification of Karnataka or renaming of Mysore state as Karnataka. After the PSUs, the next influx of population was caused by the unification of Karnataka in 1956. The extension of Rajaji Nagar accommodated them largely. This is where you find shops selling North Karnataka provisions and cuisine. The North Karnataka Kannada and accents are figures of fun in Kannada films and television serials. Shashi Deshpande, the eminent English novelist, a Central Sahitya Academy Award winner, whose father, Adya Rangachari, was one of the foremost Kannada playwrights, has described this old Mysore, North Karnataka difference very well. When they first came to Bangalore, from North Karnataka, Shashi and Adarangachari are from Bijapur. The experience of Bangalore was, and I quote, there was the distinctive Kannada peppered with Swamis, Sars, and Ammas, a strange Kannada we thought it, studded with English words. What was galling was that they thought it was our Kannada, which was strange and incomprehensible. The newly created Rajajinagar would soon be flooded with Joshis, Kattis, Kulkarnis, and Patils, speaking this Kannada. But to our chagrin, we would remain outsiders until the city found other outsiders to contend with. By then, the partition refugees had ceased to be outsiders. They had integrated. For Shashi Deshpande, the cantonment was, I quote, another world altogether, foreign territory, which we visited occasionally for English movies. This question, whether the culture of Bangalore is becoming closed, should be seen in this context. The culture of Bangalore is in a flux. The outsiders are shaping it in their own image. In Malayalam films, the image of Bangalore is that of a hip and happening place, films like Bangalore Boys, etc. I have not seen them, but I have read about them. I don't see today's films. Kannada films are trying to live up to that image, but for all that, the ideal of Kannada culture remains as articulated in the state anthem, the Nadagite, written by Kuvempu. In the Nadagite occurs a line, Janakana holuva doregala dhama, the land of kings who can be compared to King Janaka. King Janaka of Ramayana, was called Rajrishi. The Nadagite was written during the reign of Krishnaraj Vadiyar IV, who was called Rajrishi by Mahatma Gandhi, and the title stuck. His reign and culture are ideals which Kannada Sanghas refer to. The influx of so many people apart from the natural population growth necessitated the formation of new extensions and layouts. The Maharaja's government had set up the City Improvement Trust Board, CITB, which was converted into Bangalore Development Authority, BDA, by Chief Minister Devrajars. The BDA went about forming layouts and distributing sites with such speed that no attention was paid to the topography and geology of the land. Bangalore is situated on a ridge, the western part of which falls in the Kaveri watershed and the eastern part in the Pennar watershed. Taking Kaveri water to eastern Bangalore, that is Koramangala, etc., and Whitefield, is technically interbasin transfer, which is not allowed under the river water agreements generally. The ridge has a number of streams taking rainwater to these two basins. Since Kempegowda's time, a series of reservoirs, keres, were constructed on these streams which provided water for the population and agriculture in a land which was situated on hard rock with groundwater available in weathered and frayed rock. In Kempegowda's time, there were around 400 keres in Bangalore. the BDA demolished so many of the carriages and destroyed so much of the ecology and environment of Bangalore that it can as well be called the Bangalore Demolition Authority. At a seminar on Bangalore, the chief engineer of BDA, when asked about this, replied that their mandate was to give sites, so they drained the carriages and formed the sites. The BDA follows the grid pattern of urban development, mains and crosses. During the Maharaja's time, the seat of power was Mysore. So the roads leading to Mysore, that is going east to west, were called mains, and those running north to south were crosses, thus forming a grid. The BDA has continued to follow this pattern. The result is the traffic gridlock. When Lutyens designed New Delhi, roads were constructed first. Actually, they set up the Sundarnagar nursery first. Then they constructed the roads and planted trees on both sides of these roads, and then the construction started. In Bangalore, it is the reverse. Water shortage will be a major problem in Bangalore. And one should remember that Fatehpur Sikri, the great capital of Akbar, was abandoned because it ran dry. The water sources ran dry. When cities grow, there is a choice of approaches, whether to follow the dense urban growth model of density, diversity, and the resulting social dynamism, or the expansive approach with regard to greenery, openness, and a healthy environment. The Petes are an example of the dense urban growth model, and the extensions of the latter approach, which was brought in by Königsberger and Krumbiegel, the two Germans, who shaped the Bangalore that people feel nostalgic about. Patrick Geddes, the grandfather of urban planning discipline, who had spent 7 years in India and was a great admirer of traditional Indian cities and was advisor to the Maharaja of Kapurthala in Punjab, said that town planning is not spatial planning, it is folk planning. Jane Jacobs, another famous urban planning theorist, asked, are the cities being built for people or for cars? Bangalore, it seems, is now being built for cars. But the cities which the refugees had left behind were the ones which Patrick Geddes had admired. The refugees carried the memories of those places. Memories endure. Thank you.
Had Dad been here, he would have said, program to bahut acha tha, lekin garmi bahut thi. My apologies that tried as we did, the ACs seem to have let us down, and apologies to friends standing in the aisles. We'll try and do better next time. We have some time for questions or thoughts, and the mic will go around. Yes, Mr. Parda.
No, sir. Thank you very much for thank you very much for this lovely enlightening lecture. You seem to have missed out one issue which I thought I should draw attention. The Anglo-Indians also played quite a role in manning all these administrative services, in helping us with our sports, and to some extent also being there for the Army and Navy and Air Force. Would you be good enough to just elaborate a little, sir?
You see, if you recall, I had mentioned that the cantonment was an amalgamation of subcultures. So the Anglo-Indian subculture the Tamil subculture and the colonial subculture were the components of this amalgamation, and that's why I referred to Paul Fernandez's colorful drawings, because Paul Fernandez is a chronicler of Anglo-Indian culture. So the reference to Paul Fernandez was a tribute to the Anglo-Indian contribution to Bangalore cantonment.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful presentation. I have to take the chance that you're on. In 1972, when Devarajars came to power with the backward classes issue and the land issue, and I believe at that point in time, the governor of the state was an equally well-known, well-respected former chief minister of Rajasthan called Mohanlal Sukhadia. And with Babu Jagjeevan Ram in the center, not yet eclipsed by Mrs. Gandhi and the emergency that was to follow, did these three gentlemen and the whole polity around them, did they come close to solving the Kaveri Waters Agreement in 1974 when the 1924 agreement came up for renewal? Did they really come close to solving it, these three?
You mean the Kaveri?
That's right, the
dispute?
Kaveri, the dispute.
You see, the Kaveri dispute has been going on since the last years of the 19th century. So periodically, the two governments have come close to some sort of an agreement, modestly one can say. But then, you see, it is a question of the rights of the upper riparian state, which Karnataka is, and the traditional rights of usage of the lower riparian state, which is at the heart of this dispute. The other point here is that the mighty British Empire was on one side and the Mysore state, which was independent but not sovereign. Sovereignty was with the British. Independent state but not sovereign, on the other hand. So it was a very unequal contest. And the treaty reflected that unequal position. But as I said, it has been going on for more than 100 years till it landed in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has given a decision which is being followed. But you see, water disputes are not unique to Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Every state in India has those. Look at Punjab and Haryana and Rajasthan. Look at Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh over Narmada, etc. Take any state. Andhra and Karnataka about Upper Krishna project. So I suppose one has to, Dr. Aditya Sondhi ji is a lawyer. He would know more about the water disputes. But it has to be generosity on both sides, because all must live. And water has to be shared, so that's it.
Yes. Good evening, sir. I would like to congratulate you for giving us a good thought. I was not even born when you said 1940 stories and all. It's really, I really enjoyed listening to those stories and all, like how the partition happened, how the refugees left over in Bangalore, how this cantonment area and all happened. So nice to see that. So what is my question is, you mentioned that so Karnataka people have become minor, okay, and the other state people, they are not learned to speak Kannada. Even that is happening today. So may I know your thought about it, what is the plan for them to learn Kannada, so they want to stay here for a long time, for generation and generation?
See, again, this is not a problem. Sorry. Again, this is not a problem unique to Bangalore. Like the rise of Kannada organizations like Karave, Karnataka Rakshana Vedike, etc., you had the rise of Shiv Sena in Bombay. Exactly the same process. where people feel that they have become a minority in their own capital. But the nature of urban growth is such that one will have to put up with all this. There are no easy solutions. What happens is that sometimes in cities an overarching culture grows, which kind of overrides the subcultures. Now take the case of New York. You have the Little Italy in New York, you have the Chinatown in New York, you have the Latin American enclaves. And this West Side Story musical, in fact, is about the Nicaraguans in New York, etc. But with all these subcultures, there is an overarching New York culture, which has emerged thanks to, I suppose, the contribution of arts, literature, and that sort of thing. In Bangalore, that process has not yet taken place because the migrations here are very fresh. After all, the IT people have started coming from the turn of the century. And maybe over a period of time, Bangalore will have its own overarching culture, which would knit together the subcultures. Now in Bombay, for example, you have well-defined areas. Matunga is, for example, South Indians enclave, etc. But a linguistic patois of Mumbai has emerged, which is a mixture of Marathi, Hindustani, Hindi, Gujarati, Goanese lingo, and its own slang, which now you increasingly hear sometimes in films. And that sort of thing has not linguistically emerged in Bangalore yet. Though people talk of Kanglish, and that is a melange of Kannada and English and that sort of thing, but an overarching culture has yet to emerge because, as I said, the schizophrenia of Bangalore has not yet been cured.
Thank you, sir, for that really lovely lecture. I was wondering whether there are any records of people coming to Bangalore even before the partition, so like in the 40s, and if we know anything about how the British, the cantonment administration reacted to them. Did they receive them? Did they accommodate them?
See, as I mentioned, some people had come before the partition. They were in some ways connected to the defense industries or establishments, like the Kapoors of Rex, the Kapoor family of cigarette, this thing, the some Sindhi families were also there. In fact, they were the, you can say, the connection through which the migrants after partition came to Bangalore. And their experience was so good that they had come here for business. And they liked the place so much that they settled down here. The Kapoors and others, Mishras of Malleshwaram. And at that time, cantonment was predominantly British. So those who were directly into defense-related activities, they came to cantonment. Those who came for their own business came to Malleshwaram side. And that's where you have these two communities coming up. But all in all, their experience was very pleasant, and that's what attracted the refugees to come to Bangalore.
I would like to know from you the status of Punjabi and Sindhi as languages among the Punjabi and Sindhi residents of Bangalore, and also the status of the script used in their home writing and in their reading. For I do know that until about 2 or 3 generations ago, many people from Punjab and Sindh used to write in the Nastaliq script of Urdu. And I want to know if the languages Punjabi and Sindhi and the script Nastaliq or Nask are still alive and active among those who are descended from the arrivees from Partition. Thank you.
Comment was that Sindhi language and Punjabi had their own scripts, but they were using Nastaliq. Nastaliq is a style of calligraphy of Arabic script. Arabic script has Nastaliq style and Nask style, and these are used for different calligraphic purposes. Now, Nastaliq became popular in Iran, and from there it came to Urdu. And Sindhi, also Sindhi neighboring Iran, adopted Nastaliq script with certain additional symbols to represent the sounds of Sindhi which were not there in the Arabic script. So did Punjabi. Now, Punjabi's case is interesting. It is the same language which is written in 2 scripts. In Indian Punjab, it is written in Gurmukhi script. Gurmukhi because the Gurus used it for recording Gurbani. In West Punjab, in Pakistani Punjab, they use the same Nastaliq script. And earlier that was not a problem because everybody learned both the scripts. Now, of course, after partition, the 2 languages are drifting apart, so to sense. As Bernard Shaw said, Britain and America are 2 countries separated by the same language. So the Sindhi and Punjabi are 2 languages separated by the 2 scripts. But there was, incidentally, before the adoption of Nastaliq script, an original Sindhi script also, which was derived from Brahmi, because all Indian scripts from Gurmukhi to Tamil and Kannada are derived from the Brahmi script. And that script was there till it was replaced with what we now call Sindhi script. But increasingly in India now, because unfortunately Sindhis did not get a piece of land of their own. They are scattered all over. So they have started using even Devanagari for Sindhi. But I was a few years ago invited to the Sindhi school and college as chief guest for a function, and I mentioned that Sindhi was getting lost in India. Punjabi, yes, because this is the language of the 6 scriptures. So they, in any case, in order to read Gurbani, they learn Gurmukhi. But Sindhis are getting cut off from the language as well as the script. And I said, you start weekend classes for Sindhi adults and children to teach Sindhi, both the language and the script. Maybe one day they would do that.
Good evening, sir. Can you hear me? Okay, fine. I am going to be unmasked. It's bittersweet to be here and take part in this lecture, because I know if Mr. Ravi Sondhi was here, he'd be one of the few people asking pointed questions. And I'm going to be channeling Ravi uncle and ask you this question. Now, you've mentioned a very nuanced point about various migrations that the city has seen, be it the partition, the most obvious migration, and then the PSU migration, the North Karnataka migration, and the IT migration. Now, with each of these migrations, has there been a different approach by the existing political establishment of that time? Have they been welcoming or have they been passive?
The Maharaja's administration was very supportive of refugees, as I have mentioned. They even gave them monthly stipend, they gave them land to build houses, they gave them rations, they appointed a commissioner for refugees. The PSUs, this thing, Karnataka government was very generous. Look at the land which Karnataka government has allotted for these PSUs. And the land was given almost free at very nominal rates. And the third migration, the ITs, S.M. Krishna's government was very supportive of IT because he himself was a shareholder in many IT companies. And about the North Karnataka migration, I have quoted Shashi Deshpande. I think no one can express it better than what she has expressed.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ, ಇಲ್ಲಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ತಾವು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದಲ್ವೇ? ಹಾಂ. ತಾವು ಈ ವಲಸೆ ಬಂದು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ದಂಡಿನ ಪ್ರದೇಶದಲ್ಲೇ ಎಲ್ಲ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ ತಾವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಿ. ಆದರೆ ಈ ನಮ್ಮ ಹಳೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಗಾಂಧಿ ಬಜಾರ್ ಅಥವಾ ಬಸವನಗುಡಿ ಆ ಕಡೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೇನು ಆಕರ್ಷಣೆ ಇರಲೇ ಇರಲಿಲ್ವೇ? ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಾನು ಓದಿರೋ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಸಣ್ಣ ಚರಿತ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಇವ್ರು ಯಾರ ಬಗ್ಗೆನೂ ನಾನು ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಓದ್ದಂಗೆ ನಂಗೆ ಜ್ಞಾಪಕ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೇನಾದ್ರು ಬರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಅಡೆತಡೆ ಇತ್ತೆ ಅಥವಾ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಅದರ ಸ್ಪೆಸಿಫಿಕ್ ಬ್ಯಾರಿಯರ್ ಫಾರ್ ದೆಮ್ ಟು ಮೂವ್ ದಿಸ್ ಸೈಡ್ ಫಾರ್ ಆಲ್ ದಿ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಹೂ ಮೈಗ್ರೇಟೆಡ್? ಅಲ್ಲ,
ಹೌದು, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಕೆಲವರು ಮಲ್ಲೇಶ್ವರಂಗೆ ಹೋದರು, ಅದು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೆ ನಾನು.
ನಮ್ಮ ಬಸವನಗುಡಿ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಬಸವನಗುಡಿ ಗಾಂಧಿಬಾಗ್ ಕಡೆ ಜನ ಬರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಕಾಲ ನಾನು ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಓದಿಲ್ಲ, ಯಾರು ಬಂದಿರೋದು ಯಾರು ನಾನು ತಿಳಿದಿರೋ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅವರು ಈ ಕಡೆ ಬರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಅಡೆತಡೆ, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಬ್ಯಾರಿಯರ್ ಅಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಬ್ಯಾರಿಯರ್, ಲಿಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಪೆಸಿಫಿಕ್ ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಫಾರ್ ದೆಮ್ ಟು ಮೂವ್ ದಿಸ್ ಸೈಡ್.
ನೋಡಿ, his question is, for those who did not understand, that the displaced persons came to the cantonment and did not go to Baswangudi and those areas. Was there some kind of a barrier which prohibited them from going to that? Well, one was that, as I have mentioned, the cantonment culture was the culture of outsiders. The Baswangudi culture is not the culture of outsiders. I mean, as a Baswangudi person would say, I'm quoting one of my favorite authors, Saki. In one of his stories, he says, he lives in East End, but he's sane on all other matters. So Baswangudi people would say, he lives in cantonment, but he's sane on all other matters. So that was the reason why they did not go to Baswangudi and came to cantonment.
I think we can take one last question.
Thank you for that wonderful talk, sir. Your line on culture trumps economics, I think really struck with me. My question is on the immigrant gene. I think that's a gene where the culture there does fantastically economically as well, right? Especially look at Partition, and the Sindhis and the Punjabis who have come here have done very well, not just financially but also in life. My question is about, what about the Bangaloreans who migrated to the Bangalore town and Karachi? Any data on them?
Well, apparently they have done quite well for themselves, otherwise they would not have set up the Bangalore town in Karachi. And their relatives who are here, they do mention that they are all right. But you see, after the 65 war, the relations between India and Pakistan became strained, and before that it was easy to come and go. There were intermarriages, etc. Those people could visit Bangalore frequently, and I guess they are doing well. I once again warmly thank Aditya ji for giving me this opportunity to spend this evening with a very distinguished audience. Thank you very much for listening to me patiently. God bless.
Thank you. May I request you to stay on for one more minute?
Thank you, Dasji. This was like a wonderful and informative start to the Sondhi series of lectures. I just wanted to place on record, I'm Sundar Pilani, I'm Aditya's only brother-in-law and Ravina's only proud Sindhi husband. But I just wanted to say, Aditya, Mr. Sondhi would have really been proud of you. So, Mr. Sondhi, because he was more of a friend, and I really wanted to thank you from Ravina's and my side and Mr. Sondhi's side for this wonderful start to a wonderful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sundar. Could I request my sister Ravina and Sundar to please present Mr. Singh with a little token of our affection? Maybe we could do it on stage, if that's all right. Come. We'll do it on stage. I've been photobombing all evening. Your appreciation for Mr. Chiranjiv Singh. I want to sincerely thank Mr. Singh for this magnificent lecture, so rich in detail. Following from the French government, maybe we can unanimously today make Mr. Singh a knight of Bangalore. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Sultan Singh ji and other family members and friends of Mr. Chiranjiv Singh for being here. My thanks to the Kothari Hall, Mr. Barda, the Parsi Anjuman, my friends Deepak, Rangswamy, Govind Singh, Parshu, Shivu, Nitya, Loki, and everyone else who's been with me through this endeavor. And thank you all very, very much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you when we do this again. Thank you.